We are live. Welcome to Virtual Global Leadership Podcast, where we delve into the future of work, a future that's not tied down in the traditional office spaces, but one that thrives in the digital realm. Today, we have the privilege of hosting a visionary who is at the forefront of this transformation, Liam Martin. Liam is not just a thought leader, he's a pioneer in the remote work revolution. He understands the nuances of transiting companies into the digital age where working remotely isn't just an option but a strategic advantage. With his expertise, Liam guides organizations on the journey towards success. One of Liam's remarkable ventures is Time Doctor, a leading time tracking software designed specifically for remote teams. Time Doctor is a solution that enables companies to manage their remote workers as effectively as if they were all in the same room. But Liam's contribution doesn't stop there. He is one of the masterminds behind the Running Remote Conference, the largest gathering dedicated to building and scaling remote teams. This conference is a melting pot of ideas, strategies, and insights from remote business leaders, business owners, offering unparalleled networking and learning opportunities. And if you are looking to dive deeper into the world of asynchronous remote work, Liam has also co-authored the Running Remote book. Join us as we explore with Liam the endless possibilities of remote work and how we can all adapt and thrive in this ever evolving landscape. Whether you are a business owner, a remote worker, or simply curious about the future of work, this conversation promises to be enlightening. So let's dive into this conversation and discover how we all can make the most of remote work revolution with Liam. Hi, Liam. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Sagar?
I'm really good. And I know running remote conferences around the corner. But before we dive into
Yes.
that, when I
hmm
say the word future of work, what are the few things that comes to your mind?
Well, I can think about where I'm at right now. I'm actually in a co-working space in Phuket, Thailand,
Okay.
and this entire facility is a condo complex where co-working is integrated directly inside of the building. So there's about 50 or 60 people that I live with that are also working right out of this co-working space. And we work together, we hang out together, we go on trips together, and it's a really sustainable way of working. It allows everyone to be able to have access to work opportunities wherever and whenever they want. And for me, that means that everyone can just get access to work opportunities that they wouldn't have even thought possible literally 5 years ago, which is incredibly exciting for me.
So, what are some of the positives that you would like to share with the viewers? Because there are set of people who just read about remote work, but they are sometimes unable to visualize. Okay, this is how it creates, let's say, a work-life balance, or this is how
Mhm.
it creates adds efficiency to whatever I do. So, what are your thoughts there?
So I think there's a couple ways to be able to slice that. If you're simply working from home, and there are lots of studies to be able to back this up, if you simply removed the commute time and you added an extra hour and a half of sleep to a worker's workday, they would inevitably become more productive, even if they're not working any more hours. The average remote worker actually does work on average 11% more work hours than their on premise counterparts because of just the way that remote work operates. But even if you removed all those variables, you're still going to have a more productive, happier workforce than people that are going to an office. And there's a couple ways to be able to get around that. As you had mentioned before, my book, Running Remote, which focuses almost exclusively on asynchronous management, which is essentially the methodology in order to be able to manage remote workers, is a critical part of actually scaling remote work. But even if you don't do that, the ability for people to just have more time available to themselves so that they can focus counterintuitively on their work, I think is one of the most important advantages of remote work, and essentially removes all of the other disadvantages that you might have.
What advice you have for corporates or companies where they're asking their employees to come back and join the office. What are the few things that comes to your mind?
Sure, they're in trouble. The data is pretty clear. So there's a lot of misnomers about that push back to the office. And I don't know where you are located, Sagar, but I know in the United States, the numbers, and there's three major data sets that I follow: Castle Systems, the Home Network, the Home Pulse Network Survey, and I can't remember the third, but all three actually have almost perfect correlation. There is more remote work happening today than there was 6 months ago. So remote work is going up, not down, even though you'd see so many of these articles talking about how we're all going back to the office. We're all going back to the office. The actual lowest point of, or sorry, the highest point, I suppose, of office penetration was in January of 2023. So we're now actually past that point, and there is more remote work happening now. And I would project, amongst a lot of other academics that are in this field, I agree with them, that we're probably essentially going to be back to 50% remote work by approximately 2040. Right now, we're sitting at some really interesting numbers. So pre-pandemic, we were 4% of the US workforce working remotely in January of 2020. By March of 2020, we were at 46% of the US workforce working remotely. We did have a peak for one moment of 67% of the US workforce working remotely. Now we sit at about 36%. 2 quarters ago, we were at 34%. So we're seeing that slow return back to remote. And I would project that we'll be at 50%, as I said, by 2040.
So, Liam, I'm currently based out of Mumbai, India, where
Mhm.
the remote work trend is still at its very early stages. There's a lot of
Yes.
acceptance to hybrid work post pandemic. This is what I can share in terms of trend. Yes, there are a lot of organizations, let's say a lot of startups and SMEs that are preferring remote because it saves them cost. It's in its initial phases. So that is the other trend I have observed. So just thought of sharing this with you before I move to the next question. Mm,
Mhm.
Liam, what inspired you to build this one of the finest networks and communities that is running remote?
That started quite a few years ago. I was approximately in 2017, we were running a company retreat. And so remote companies, every single year, what they do is we fly everyone into one particular location, and we essentially run a mini conference about how we're going to, or what our plans are for the next year. So we assess and audit what we've done in the previous year, and we look forward to figuring out what we're going to do next year. And we started looking for a lot of information to try to figure out, how do we scale to 500 employees, 1,000 employees, 1,500 employees remotely? And there was very,
Yeah.
very little information. There was a lot of information on how to hire a virtual assistant, or how to outsource, or how to hire people on Upwork, but there was no information on how to build billion-dollar remote first companies. And so I had a lot of friends that were remote founders of billion-dollar companies. And I said, well, why don't we just put together a little conference about that? And I have a philosophy which I call ready, fire, aim. So I just rented the venue 8 months into the future and said, if worst case scenario, I lose $200,000 on this venue. Thankfully, we didn't. We actually we made profit that year. And that's been approximately 6 years ago. So this will be our sixth one. And what I'm really focused on is trying to figure out how to build and scale remote companies specifically. So how do they tick? How do they act differently from on-premise in office companies? Obviously, that was a much more popular topic in 2020 after the pandemic, but it's still so relevant today to be able to look at all the learnings that these companies have had literally over the last decade and a half of building remote companies, to figure out the methodology of how to be able to scale those organizations. And also, too, if you are not necessarily fully remote, you're hybrid as an example, running remote is also a great opportunity for you to learn more about how to build a company like that, because we're realizing it's not just fully remote companies, it's hybrid and distributed companies as well that want to get this information.
So, Liam, I just wanted to share that it's been around 8 months that I'm hosting this podcast, and
Mhm.
I've joined Running Remote community in the month of October. But even before that, I interviewed uh, most of the leaders in the remote work domain.
Mhm.
All of them mentioned about running remote. All of them,
Oh,
in a way,
great.
all of them asked, Sagar, are you planning to come to next year? You must come. This is the
Are
feedback.
you
I'm just sharing this because I've been interacting with some of your team members, but I'm just
good?
sharing this uh, because in all the interactions, even in couple of podcasts that you will hear, there is a mention of running remote somewhere in maybe some of the
Oh,
podcasts
great.
that I did. So I just wanted to know from here, what are some of the areas that you are constantly focusing, though you mentioned that all the leaders that I spoke with had good words for running remote. So I would want to hear from you.
Great. Yeah. So I think there's three major things that we focus on at the Running Remote Conference, at least for this next year. Number one is remote founders. So those are the people that really have drank the Kool-Aid. They've either been remote from day one or they transferred remote during the pandemic, and they're really excited about running a fully distributed team. And so for those founders, we really build a lot of content on how do you build X? How did I go from 1 million to 10 million or 10 million to 100 million? Or how did I grow a support team of 5,000 remote reps, as an example? We just had Shopify that did a talk about
Sure.
that a few years
Wow.
ago.
Wow.
So that's the first demographic. The second demographic are CHROs and CPOs. So heads of HR or heads of people. And actually a really good subcategory of those, which is up and coming, is a head of remote, that not only control some of the HR responsibilities, but also control the technology stack associated with building out remote organizations. And they really take the orders from the founder CEO of a remote first company and said, hey, we need to be able to implement this. So there's lots of nuts and bolts implementation talks that go on as well inside of the conference. And then the third category of people that we have been talking more and more to, and it's been very popular over the last 2.5 years, are enterprise companies. So companies that have 1, 5, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 employees inside of them. And they're really trying to figure out, how do we figure out this remote work thing? Because our employees want it. It's the number one request that they're looking for. But then we have to completely rebuild our entire HR architecture in order to be able to actually equate for this new way of working. So those three core groups are the ones that we serve. And what we're realizing is a lot of these enterprise companies are really looking for solutions. And it may not be that they're going completely remote tomorrow, but it may be, what are the best policies on having a remote Fridays plan
Hmm.
implemented? How do we actually execute upon that? And you'd think that that's quite simple if you're a startup of, let's say, 50 or 60 people. But when you're a company of 50,000, it's incredibly complicated to be able to get running properly. And so they learn a lot about that as well.
And so, any surprises for running remote 2024? Anything you want to share with the viewers?
There's always a couple surprises that we have at every single running remote. I can tell you previous ones because I can't tell you about the surprises that we have for this one.
Yeah,
I
sure.
remember in Montreal, Ike Steitman actually proposed to his wife and COO live on stage, which was incredibly exciting. And that was crazy. The logistics of, is he going to pop the question or isn't he going to pop the question, took our production team for a complete 180, because he essentially said, okay, I'm going to do it. And then maybe about 5 or 6 days beforehand, he said, I'm not going to do it. So then I had to cancel like the balloons, the flowers, all of this kind of stuff, all the logistics, right, to be able to make
Yeah.
that happen. And then right before he walked out on stage, he said, I'm going to do it. And I was like, shit, dude. Okay, well, I'm going to try to figure out how to make this happen for you. We have had founders of multi-billion-dollar companies, right? We've had the founders of GitLab, as an example. We've had the founders of Atlassian. We've had so many different massively influential remote-first organizations that have come and spoken at the event. And we always have one surprise guest that isn't in our speaker
Wow.
tally. So you have to come to be able to see who that person is. We usually actually keep them very quiet, and it's just for the people that attend the event directly at Running Remote.
So what are the best ways if anyone wants to sign up for the conference? How do they go about it?
You just go to runningremote.com and there's ticket options that are available right there. There's actually two major options that you can go for. Number one is to just buy a ticket, or number two is to be able to get access to the Running Remote community, which allows you to be able to have access to all of the people that are discussing this stuff 24/7. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking to yourself, this is really great, this is something that I would love to be able to get a hold of and learn more about, probably the community is the best spot for you, because you get access to everyone that is interacting inside of the community 365 days out of the year. And then we basically come together one time per year to be able to have a deep engagement on remote work and where it's going. Essentially, what I like to call Running Remote is we have these company retreats every year for remote first organizations. And Running Remote is that for the owners of those organizations, where we can all come together and really kind of think about what we're going to be doing next year and what the newest and greatest techniques and technology are that are coming across the pipe.
Thank you, Liam, for sharing that. Liam, this conference and getting all the leaders is a wonderful thing, and it must happen. And I think this is wonderful that you have been doing this for many years. Uh,
Mhm.
what happens, once we are back in our respective geographies? Then how does running remote support the relationships that have either built or nurtured over time? What are some of the activities we do to support that? The fostering of relations happens continuously.
Sure. So because we're called Running Remote, we have a lot of remote interaction that we can have throughout the year. So if you're part of the community, you would get access to live webinars, interactions with other founders that are doing really interesting things. We also have masterminds that literally shoot off from that community. So let's say that you're a head of people and you're really, really passionate about employment processing and payroll. And you're trying to
Yeah.
figure out, we have companies as an example that have employees in dozens of different countries all over the world. And it's a logistical nightmare to be able to actually pay those people properly. You'd think that it would be easy, but the HR policies in India are completely different from the HR policies in Thailand or Canada or the United States. So how do you actually figure that out? Well, we actually have a mastermind right now where we have world experts that talk about that subject bi-weekly. And if you're really passionate about that, you can come in for a couple months and you can interact with that type of community to figure out not only how you can do it, but specifically figure out problems along the way that you're encountering, and then talk to those experts to be able to get it solved.
Wonderful. So, a large part of audience could also be, let's say, job seekers, or it could be people who have been in the industry for, let's say, 5, 7, 10 years. They have the experience. They have had the experience of being in the traditional offices, but now
Mhm.
remote becomes like a ideal preposition to for their lifestyle. So, is anything
Mhm.
running remote offers something for them also?
No, they don't. And here's why.
Okay.
We specifically are building a conference for the business owners and operators of these companies, the employees that want to be able to find jobs. There are tons of great conferences out there that you can get access to, that you'll be able to find those types of opportunities. We generally tell people, if you're not managing remote workers or hybrid workers, then you probably shouldn't come to the conference. It's not the conference that's really designed for you. Ironically, every single year there are people that go and come in, and they're a little bit disappointed. But I'm telling you right now, if you don't manage people, don't come. It's not the conference for you. I have a mindset, and I've gotten this from Steve Jobs, which is, it's more important to figure out who your customer isn't than figure out who your customer is. And our customer is not the remote job seeker, because for us, we really don't want to speak to that subject at Running Remote.
Yes. So, Liam, what are some of the countries where you see, or geographies where you see that in the next 5 years there will be high adoption when it comes to remote?
So I think the US is still really recovering quickly from remote, way more than any other countries. So as I said, right now, we're probably sitting at about 36, 37% of all work being remote in the United States, and that is including hybrid work. There is Europe is probably not far behind in terms of those numbers. Ironically, Southeast Asia is actually one of the lowest at this point in terms of adoption. And I think it's just a cultural issue, even though there is so much outsourcing, there are so many BPOs in India and the Philippines and a bunch of other countries in between in Southeast Asia. Ironically, they're still all coming into the office, which doesn't really necessarily make sense to me. And I'd like to be able to spend more time studying why that is occurring. I think it's just a cultural issue of top-down management philosophy, but we'll have to be able to see. But I would say US is definitely the leader at this point. And then I would also say a really big up and coming market is essentially all of Africa. So we have been seeing some really interesting data on gig work. And so, like going to Upwork, going to Fiverr, and the majority of gig work growth right now is happening in Africa. I believe South Africa had a 131% year over year growth rate for gig work. So it's accounting for
Wow.
essentially 60 to 70% of gig work right now. And the reason why that's happening is because you're seeing mass communication technology being deployed at scale, right? You're seeing like Elon Musk's satellite network where you can get access to high fidelity, high speed internet essentially at a fraction of the cost of laying out all that infrastructure. So a lot of those countries are just hopscotching over other countries that had to lay out much more expensive infrastructure to be able to make that work. And so Africa right now is growing very, very quickly on gig work. And gig work is essentially the gateway drug towards long-term remote work opportunities. So I'm very excited about Africa. If I was a BPO, as an example, I would probably be deploying a lot of my early infrastructure inside of countries in Africa because they're just getting the talent is really great. There's a high level of education, but then there's still also a significant cost savings, even in comparison to Southeast Asia, which historically was a really good center for cost savings. But now those salaries are actually becoming quite close to their Western counterparts. So that um, that labor advantage, that labor costing advantage is actually disappearing to a certain degree. And Africa is probably the last real opportunity for people that are interested in building out a massive infrastructure of labor. Case in point is the redlining company for OpenAI. So the company that basically does all of the testing of the newest Sora video AI tool that just came out 2 weeks ago and blew everyone away. All of their QA testing is in Africa because they need a workforce of hundreds of thousands of workers, and then they know that they can get access to those workers in Africa.
Wow, William, this is so helpful. Thank you for sharing this wonderful insight. William, what inspired you to write the Running Remote book? You know, and like what is it that why should we grab that book?
Sure. So about 3 to 4 weeks into COVID, which was absolutely insane. I have never experienced a crazier moment in my entire career, and I probably never will, of COVID completely shifting everyone over to remote. Our mission is to empower the world's transition towards remote work.
Mhm.
And essentially, from February to March, mission was accomplished. We actually debated, should we just shut down because we're done? Mission is accomplished. Let's just all go home. Um, the company's mission that we thought was unachievable has been achieved. And I had a client that is a G20 country,
Mhm.
and they deployed on Time Doctor without telling us. So they literally deployed tens of thousands of seats inside of our system, and they blew out our node, one of our nodes on AWS, because of just the amount of throughput that they were adding in. And they called us, they contacted us, and they said, we have no idea what we're doing here. We have hundreds of thousands of employees that we essentially took remote yesterday. Can you tell us what to do? And I said, well, we have a team of 150 people. I don't know how to deploy hundreds of thousands of workers remote yesterday. And I remember very clearly they said, well, you're the first person that we've been able to contact that is that level of an expert. And so I realized I would have to actually sit down and teach people for 4 to 5 hours every single time I saw someone like that, or I could write a book that coalesced all of those learnings into one simple package that I can give them the book. And then if they needed extra help afterwards, I could jump on a 1 hour call with them to be able to figure out all of the small little details on the outside. So that's basically why we wrote the book. Also, our publisher, HarperCollins, was really interested in actually getting product on remote work onto the shelf, because at that point there really wasn't anything written about remote work. Now there's a ton written about remote work, which
Yeah.
is exciting. And we've really kind of seen that space explode from a book market perspective over the last few years. But Harper said, hey, listen, we would love to be able to have you write a book on remote work, because right now there's almost nothing out there. They were not very happy about how long I took to write it. It took me about 2.5 years to write it, but I wanted to write a book that I was really proud of, as opposed to just getting something out quick, which, pro con, I think I'm much happier about a book that I'll be excited to show people in 10 years, as opposed to one that's just like a smoke in the fire type of book that comes out within 6 months.
Wonderful. I just wanted to share what are some of the myths or some of the areas where you always want to share that with the remote leader, but you know what, sometimes due to the situation we are unable to share with them. So what are some of those observations, or maybe some of the mistakes that remote leaders you have seen they might be doing, and you wanted to share that?
First one, subject of the book, asynchronous management, which is the ability to be able to interact with your coworkers without doing it synchronously. So we're communicating synchronously right now, but if you were watching the recording of this session, you'd be consuming that information asynchronously. So that's how the majority of remote companies operate pre-pandemic. So when I looked at successful remote companies, almost every single one had some form of what I like to call asynchronous management at their core. And so this allows for you to infinitely scale your organization, because you're not dependent upon managers to be the mouthpiece of communicating information throughout your organization. All of that information can be handled by platforms like your project management system, your process documentation system, Slack, email, whatever it is. So that's the first one, asynchronous management. You can just Google that. You can read the book if you'd like. You can come to the conference. We talk about that all day long. But that's the core methodology, if you are running a remote organization, that you really have to master in order to be able to truly scale an organization. The second thing is charisma bias. And I see this a lot happening inside of hybrid organizations. So I don't know how, in terms of your interaction with other coworkers and how you kind of work. But generally, if I was in a meeting room like I'm in right now, there's a big glass box on this other side, so everyone can see in on what I'm doing. Let's say there were 8 people sitting here. Without even hearing what they're saying, I would be able to tell you whose ideas get adopted the most. It's
Hmm.
the 6 foot plus white guy that looks like Captain America. Generally, those people's ideas get adopted way more often than anyone else. I don't know if you know this. The highest
Yeah.
concentration of 6 foot plus men are located where? Bit of a trick question. Where is the highest concentration of 6 foot plus white men?
No, I have no idea. Please go ahead.
Fortune 500 CEOs.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
the highest
Okay.
concentration of 6 foot plus white men, more than the NBA. Now, why are those
Hmm.
people concentrated in those particular areas? Is it that they're more intelligent than everyone else? Is it that they have some innate ability to be CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies? No, it's neither of those. It's that their packaging, the way they're perceived in the world, allows people to agree with their ideas more often. Inside of asynchronous organizations, that advantage is removed. So now
Hmm.
the 5'8", non Captain America looking guy like me can actually give you a piece of information that is probably a better idea than Captain America, but because those advantages have disappeared, I can now communicate my ideas on the same playing field as everyone else. So the Captain Americas of the world cease to be as effective. And in reality, most companies, you can literally boil it down to this, are dependent upon the quality of their ideas in order to succeed. Whoever has the best information generally ends up winning. And because you've got this bias of the packaging around your idea, you're always at a disadvantage. But if you can actually just focus on the content of the idea as opposed to the context that it's delivered by, you actually end up running much more successful businesses. And the data would actually support this because most asynchronous organizations grow way faster, on average about 3 times faster than their in-office counterparts.
So, Liam, I have seen there are a lot of handbooks, culture books that are available of good companies, like really good remote companies, and they constantly update it. But what you're sharing here, I mean, I have not seen exactly what you have said is written, or if it is written, please share. And also, please share what are some of the best resources, wherein, let's say, from a leadership standpoint or from a culture standpoint, resources that can be useful for remote leaders.
Sure. So first one obviously would be my book. That would be
Of
the one
course.
that I'm most
Yes.
accountable or, you know, uh, more clearly correlated towards what we've talked about today is if you
So
just go
Liam,
to
I promise
Amazon
here,
running remote.
I
Yep.
promise one thing here. I'm going to read your book, and we are going to do one more
Oh, great.
podcast, which is going to, which will try to adapt and use those learnings and share with the communities. That's my promise. Go ahead.
Perfect. All right,
Yeah.
great. And then another great resource is about.gitlab.com/handbook.
Okay.
So that is GitLab's open source process documentation database. They have over 8,000 entries, and they encourage people to steal those process documents and use them for their own company. So if you want to know how much equity you get when you join GitLab, if you want to know how they do demos, if you want to know how they market their products, it's all inside of about.gitlab.com/handbook. And so just check that out. It's a really great resource. I would also say probably all of the running remote videos on YouTube,
Mhm.
youtube.com/running remote, all of the videos are open source. So every single talk that we get out at the conference will eventually end up on the YouTube channel. You can go and get access to that at no cost to you if you're interested in consuming that information. And it really is the largest database of remote work deep thoughts that I've encountered. And then I would say outside of that, anything that WordPress does is really great. And another really big up and comer is Atlassian. So they're a recent transition to remote. They were on premise, they were in an office, and now they're adopting remote at scale, which is really exciting to be able to see a company that has successfully transferred from an in office environment to a remote environment. And they talk about all of the bumps that they had along the way, which you can also talk. If you just type in Atlassian remote work,
Yep.
Annie Dean is the head of remote for Atlassian, I believe, and she does a lot of really great talks as well. She's also coming to Running Remote this year.
So Liam, what I'm inspired by is the particular human behavior or the human observation that you shared about the,
Mhm.
the charisma bias, right? Now,
Mhm.
I've referred to some of the documents that you have shared. They definitely have some of the great processes, tools, how to do, and maybe a lot of show to tell areas also they have covered really nicely. But when you say this is a wonderful insight, now, uh, from your experience, from a cultural standpoint, what are some of
Mhm.
the observations that you have made on these lines, wherein remote teams, their employees are comfortable sharing what they are going through, how they are what is how they have progressed in their journey, because I'm sure a lot of CHROs or HROs who are attending or who are part of running remote conference would have those questions. So what are your thoughts there?
So I have um, probably a divisive thought on this, which is
Sure.
I think that the HR department should have a very clear mandate that is different from the rest of the organization. So if an employee inside of Time Doctor wants to talk to HR about a problem that they're having, so let's say they've got a problem with problem at home. Let's say that there was a death in the family and they're having real trouble with that. It's HR's responsibility to be able to solve that problem for them without necessarily talking to management about it. And well, not necessarily, do not talk to management about it. So create a very clear fire line between an HR issue and the managerial structure that is dependent upon the outcomes of the business. Because ironically, we measure everything inside of Time Doctor and Running Remote. And we've identified that when people when their output goes down, when their productivity starts to go down, when they start becoming less productive and less successful inside of the business, when we really tunnel into the deep issue, 95% of the time, it's a personal issue that's outside of work that's impacting their output. Their dog died. Their kid is, sick. They've got some type of emotional issue that they need to be able to get out of. And so HR can solve that if they're not dependent upon reporting that inside of the larger structure of the organization. So I think that
Wow.
HR should actually be handling all of these problems, and just the larger management team just has to trust that, hey, they have a separate budget. We're going to solve that problem. And it's essentially almost like a private therapy session or private therapy organization inside of the company, where you can say whatever you want. You will not get fired, because that will get you back to being the most productive self that you are. And from a pragmatic perspective, that's all I care about. I just want your output to be able to remain high, regardless of what the issue is. And if that means that I have to sign you up for therapy once every week for the next 2 months to be able to get you to where you need to go, then I have no problem doing that, because that's way cheaper than having to let you go and retrain someone brand new that can cost for us hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wonderful. I also, I think we discussed while your introduction about the Time Doctor. So, what inspired you to create that platform? And
Sure.
please go ahead and share that. Yeah.
Yeah. So back in 2011, I was actually running a remote tutoring business. So I was tutoring university students on
Wow.
pre-med prerequisites. And so that business was relatively successful, but I ended up actually hitting a major barrier, which was I couldn't actually account for the amount of hours a tutor was working with a student. So I'd bill a student for 10 hours. The student would come to me saying, I didn't work with my tutor for 10 hours. I worked with them for 5. I'd go to the tutor and say, hey, you billed me for 10 hours. He's saying 5. What's the deal? He'd say, yeah, I worked with him for 10 hours. I'd end up having to refund the student for 5 hours, pay the tutor the full 10 hours, and I would lose money on that deal. So that was really destroying the business, because I couldn't precisely equate for the amount of hours that were worked with a student. And so Time Doctor was really the solution for that problem, where I could perfectly solve that issue of a tutor working with student, how many hours are they working, so that I could bill more precisely. And I suggest to anyone that's actually thinking about building a software business or a SaaS business, make sure that you're scratching your own itch first, because at the least, you'll actually at least be happy with what you've built, and you'll be able to do something with it if all else fails. Same methodology actually with the Running Remote conference. I said, hey, if no one shows up to this thing, at least I'll get a world-class education from all of these remote founders that will come to this conference and speak at it. So scratch your own itch. That's what I did, and it ended up working out pretty well for us.
So, also, can you share some of the success stories or case studies of the companies that have significantly benefited from Time Doctor?
Sure. I mean, if you just go to our main website, you'll be able to see all of the different case studies from companies that have used our technology to be able to build out, their organizations. But we work from anywhere from, 1 to 2 seat organizations that are just running micro businesses, all the way up to companies that have tens of thousands of employees inside of them. And it just varies dependent upon the use case. Obviously, a two-seat organization has very much different challenges from a 20,000 seat organization, but we serve all of those customers in between.
But any particular example that comes to you on the top of the mind? I think you mentioned about one of the G20 companies. They reached out to you, but otherwise, there are
Mhm.
any other projects or any other collaboration that you are extremely proud of?
Sure. There's a company that I'm working with right now that I'm actually having a call with tonight. And I can't tell you the name of the company if I tell you the
Sure,
story,
sure. Yeah.
but the story is they are they have a big issue with their support department, and they've identified that over out of 10,000 support tickets, a third of those tickets take more than 100 minutes to close. And they
Hmm.
know that if a ticket takes more than 100 minutes to close, they've lost money at the deal. So more than a third of the tickets that they're working with, they are cash negative on it. And what we use is artificial intelligence to be able to analyze that entire process and figure out specifically why a
Hmm.
third of their tickets are taking 100 plus minutes to close. And you'll actually identify it's for a lot of weird reasons. The majority of them are that the reps will actually not delegate that ticket to another rep when they're stuck, when they don't know what to do next. So we see that they're going to the support portal, or they're going to an FAQ page, or maybe they're Googling someone else, or they're talking with their coworkers. So we've identified that they actually get to a point where they don't know what to do next, and they're trying to figure out a solution, and they're not pushing that to the next tier of support reps fast enough. So we're actually presenting this to them today, a specific plan that we project will actually cut their 100 plus minute tickets in half, which will save
Wow.
them, well, in this particular case, will probably save them over $100 million a year, just by analyzing how people work and how we can use technology to be able to analyze that process and get them to work better, which is not only better for the employer, but more importantly, it's better for the employee so that they can specifically see how they can improve their workday and have a less stressful workday where they're not spent when they're not spending half their day trying to figure out a solution to a problem, when they can actually just delegate that to somebody who can solve it in a minute.
Wonderful. So, I'm now keen to know what is that USP that separates Time Doctor with all the various products that are available or solutions that are available in the world.
Sure. So we're not a time tracking company, we're a time analytics company. So we don't just
Mhm.
measure how long someone worked, we measure what you did while you were working so that you can have actionable insights to improve your workday. And it's not just a documentation of what you did, it also provides you actionable insights, predictive analytics on what to do in the future in order to be able to become more productive. Kind of almost thinking about it as like Fitbit for work.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Uh, Liam, what are some of the effective strategies for managing remote teams, especially in different time zones?
So again, I'm going to go back to asynchronous management on that one.
Of
And
course. Of
some of the
course.
tenets that connect to asynchronous management is process documentation. So
Yeah.
the biggest barrier towards multiple different time zones, and we have team members in 46 different countries all over the world right now. And the way that we manage those people is not through managers, counterintuitively. So we don't like the word managers, we like the word leaders, which are focusing on how are you feeling right now? How can I make you more productive? What barriers can I get out of your way in order to become successful? Things that we don't do and managers do is, well, what are your numbers today? What did you do throughout your workday? How did you work with other people throughout your workday? All of that information is actually handled by the platform. So tools like Time Doctor, our project management system, our process documentation. If you have a question let's say about the PTO policy inside of your
Mhm.
company. What you would usually do inside of an office environment is, or even inside of a remote environment that isn't asynchronous, you would message your manager and you would say, hey, what's my PTO policy? I want to be able to take the next 5 days off. Inside of an asynchronous organization, you would simply look at your process documentation. There's a really great tool called Slite.com, which is
Mhm.
using large language models specifically trained on all of the documentation that exists inside of your organization. So you would go onto Slite and you would say, what's our PTO policy? And
Mhm.
or what's my PTO policy? And it would say, well, I'm looking at Bamboo HR. It looks like you have 17 days of PTO left. You can take them whenever you want, as long as you inform your manager. Would you like to take the next 5 days off? I can connect you with Bamboo right now to be able to make that happen. So it removes the manager as that barrier to entry and empowers the employee to be much more autonomous in how they work. As long as you can expand individual autonomy inside of your organization, people will be able to get stuff done way faster than the old model of managers being the gatekeepers towards that information.
So, Lim, this is now more about you. I would love to know more about, how do you structure your day? How do you ensure that whatever work you do or whatever projects you are part of is handled effectively? What's your secret mantra? Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I'm currently in Thailand right now, so I
Yeah.
work nomadically in the winters. So generally, right after New Year's, we will travel to a different country. So we've been to places like Egypt or Italy or Costa Rica or Colombia. We're currently in Thailand right now. The Philippines is another place that we've spent our winters in. And so, because the time zones are different, my workflow is a little bit different. I wake up around 8:30. I'll kind of get a little bit of breakfast set up for my kids. My wife will usually go out and do something. They're currently at the beach right now. I'll start with my first meeting with my assistant. She will tell me exactly my agenda for the day. So exactly what I'm doing throughout that workday, what bumps I'm going to have along the way. She's usually also my co-pilot that works with me. She even told me as an example, hey, you have this podcast or you have this virtual session that you can't miss because it's going to be streamed and you need to be able to make sure that you're on for that. So make sure that you've booked those sessions. She booked this meeting room that I'm in right now as an example, so that there's no there's no opportunities for me to fall off of my agenda. And then I just work on a lot of time blocking. So time
Mhm.
blocking is really the most effective way to be able to manage your time. A lot of people have to-do lists. To-do lists are okay. They're definitely a step forward, but what I like to do is take my to-do list and put it into time blocks. So I usually use my calendar as that tool. So I'll say, hey, I'm working with Sagar on this particular podcast, and I think we have literally like 7 minutes left on this
Yeah.
agenda item. And then 15
Yeah.
minutes later, I jump into another agenda item, which is actually working on a talk for a conference called SaaS Open that I'm speaking at the end of March. And I'm going to work on that for the next 3 hours as a time block. So just breaking down those time blocks is so critical because you can actually really quantifiably measure your own success. And then I correlate that all inside of Time Doctor data. So I can see maybe I've equated 3 hours for this work on a SaaS Open doc, which is like a brand new conference deck that I'm making, and maybe I only get like a third into completing this particular project. Well, then I know that I actually need to work out another 6 hours throughout my work week to be able to be on target to build that particular piece of information. Whereas if I'm just building it out in a to-do list, I'm not quantifying the amount of time that I'm spending on that. And therefore, I can't actually properly project the amount of time that I'll need to be able to do it. A lot of people have these long to-do lists and they never actually get them done because they don't know how long they're going to take. With time blocking, it removes that barrier.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Lim, how do you build successful relationships remotely? Because I know you are working with various stakeholders, be it other remote leaders or maybe some organizers, some various stakeholders. So how do you establish that trust?
Mm. So, biggest thing that I do with my synchronous time, because we are an asynchronous organization,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
synchronous time is almost exclusively for connection. So things that we're doing right now. I'm talking to you synchronously, you're talking to me synchronously, and I try to reserve all of the time that I spend on video for connection. How can I build deeper connections with people? And I can do it right through my laptop, right? And so that's one of the biggest things that I can do, not only for people like you, but speakers at the Running Remote conference, partners, coworkers, people that I'm selling to, trying to focus on building that connection. Everything else is asynchronous. So the details of a project, as an example, but we can talk about that asynchronously. I can put together a presentation for you on Google Docs or Google Slides. I can give you that presentation, record it on Loom. You can consume it at 2x speed, and then we can focus on doing we can do a video call that's maybe 30 minutes instead of an hour and a half, because I don't know about you, but you've probably been in these types of meetings where someone just sits and presents a presentation and you have 8 people on a call just watching a presentation. You could have turned that into a Loom video, and then we could have actually been addressing the outcomes, the issues connected to that video, as opposed to 8 people just watching that for an hour and then only having half an hour to really get into the nitty gritty of why that's important and why it's going to succeed or not succeed inside of your business.
Liam, fundamentally we are humans and we do a lot of work, but then I'm sure you must be experienced, or you would have experienced, let's say, burnout, concerns, failures. So what is your way of, overcoming that or managing that?
So for me, it is, I have a very problematic feedback loop on burnout. I will usually work until I'm burnt out, and then I'll just take a week or 2 off, and then I'm rebooted and ready to go. Sometimes I can't do that. Like, as an example, running remote, doesn't matter if I'm burnt out, I'll just grind the gears and make it happen. Um, I wish I could give you a better answer. I'm not very good at kind of
Sure.
managing my own burnout and capacity. I do know when it starts to happen for me, I actually get like a physical eye twitch that I
Yeah.
start to identify, and I'm realizing, oh, that's too much. I need to just take a pause or reboot. I basically call it a reboot, which is cancel all my meetings for a week. I just need to kind of sit and do nothing. I don't suggest that you do that. It's actually probably pretty self-destructive, but that's the way that I handle it. I would also say that being able to be distributed and remote offers me opportunities to be able to work in ways that no one else has access to. I'm currently
Mm.
looking out on a jungle. Actually, I can show
Mhm.
you guys right now. So
Sure, sure,
I'm
of
literally
course.
looking out
Wow.
on a beautiful jungle, and I'm in
That's where half
Phuket,
of your
Thailand
burnout
right
goes
now.
down, isn't it? That's where half of the burnout goes down.
Yeah. So for me, the ability for me to be able to work wherever I want, whenever I want, is probably a huge overall increase towards my productivity, because I can just do things that no one else has the opportunity to do. And I am very blessed to be able to have that type of opportunity. And we empower every single team member inside of our organization to have those same opportunities as well, which I think is the secret to why people love remote work so much, is they can work on their own terms and they have that autonomy to be able to work that the way that they want. So I think if you're looking at burnout right now and you're stuck in that same gray cubicle day in, day out,
Mm.
go get a job somewhere where you can get out of it. I think you might as well be burnt out on a beach as opposed to a
Mm.
cubicle. I think you're going to have a
Yeah,
better chance with it if you're on the beach.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Liam, for sharing wonderful insights. I think we covered a lot. We spoke about, managing remote teams efficiently. Wonderful insights for leaders. We touched upon, some of the, let's say, soft, hard areas where leaders must look at. Some of the blind spots we covered. We also, spoke about what's happening in the coming running remote conference. And thank you for sharing some of the surprises that happened in the last few years. And also, we gained wonderful insights on how Time Doctor is contributing to create efficiency in organizations. Just before this, we end this conversation, if you have any closing remarks for our viewers, feel free to go ahead and share that.
Sure. So Rexandra just mentioned that most Captain America white guys are also narcissistic, research found. So they nurture a very toxic, egocentric company culture. Agreed, Rexandra. And I think that one of the most important things that you can do to combat Captain America's is, as I said, just remove that advantage from the work environment. And the other thing that's really great with that too is if you look at gender and racial issues, they essentially disappear when you have an asynchronous remote environment, because I'm not seeing my skin color, I'm not seeing my gender when I'm working asynchronously. I'm only seeing the output that it's produced. So really great to be able to focus in on that. If you do just that one thing, you're going to be fantastic. Other than that, go to youtube.com/runningremote for all of our open talks. And if you're interested in getting a ticket, go to runningremote.com. And then if you're also interested in signing up for Time Doctor, go to timedoctor.com. 14-day free trial. You get to play with it as much as you want for 14 days.
Thank you, Liam, for joining us for Virtual
Thank
Global
you.
Leadership Podcast, and thank you, viewers, for listening. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.